Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I'm Venkat. This is part 27, Properties in C Sharp. In this session, we'll be looking at read-write, read-only, and write-only properties. We'll also be looking at auto-implemented properties which are introduced in C Sharp 3.0. In the previous session, we have seen how to protect class fields using public getter and setter methods. In this session, we will do the same thing using properties. If you haven't watched my video session on why properties are required, I would strongly encourage you to do so before continuing with the session because we'll be using examples from our previous session. So let's look at that example. In the previous session, we have designed a student class with 3 private fields, and to protect and encapsulate these fields, we have used the respective public get and set methods. Okay, for example, to read and write to this private field ID, we are making use of setID and getID methods. Okay, so now how do we do that using properties in C Sharp? Okay, to do that, there is a slight modification that we have to do. We know that ID field is actually an integer. So public int, and you don't have to have a parameter passed in. And what you need to have instead is a get and set accessor. Since this is set, we're gonna call this set and a get accessor. So what is the get accessor going to do? It is simply going to return the ID. So this underscore ID. And look at this. So public, and instead of calling it as set ID, we'll call it as if ID. So the property name is ID, and we are saying, okay, if somebody sets the value, let's say for example, how do they set it? Something like C1 dot ID. Look at that. It's appearing as if it's a field. ID, let's say if somebody sets it to 101. Now what's going to happen? This 101 gets passed into this property, and the set accessor will be called because we are setting the value. And then how will it be checked? There is a built-in keyword called value. Okay, so this value will contain 101 which we are assigning to this property. So this 101 actually gets passed into this keyword. So if 101 is 101 less than or equal to 0, that's false. So it comes here, and this dot ID equal to again value. So this is what is the disconnect that you have to understand. The value keyword is the one which will receive the value that we set to this property. Okay, so in this example, we are setting the ID to 101. So this 101 value gets passed into this keyword. Okay, so we use that. If somebody passes 500, that gets passed again to this. And since we are setting the value, the set accessor gets invoked. And similarly, if somebody is trying to print the value, how they would do that? Console.writeLine c1 dot, you don't have to use get ID anymore, c1 dot ID. So now the C sharp will automatically understand that, okay, somebody is trying to pull the value out of this property. So what happens is it invokes this ID property, and somebody is trying to read the value. So it invokes the get accessor of this property and returns the value which is there in that private field. So pretty simple, right? And the advantage of using this property is, look at this, it's not like a method. You use the properties as if they are fields. But on the other hand, when we had set ID, we had to call it like a method. So there's no need to make use of the set ID or get ID methods anymore. Instead, we use this property, public int ID. And the same is the case we do for name. Okay, so what we do, since name is of type string, so public string, and give it a meaningful name. Maybe name is the property. and we get rid of that parameter, and a property will have a set and a get accessor. So set accessor and a get accessor. So what will the get accessor do? It will simply return the value that is present in the field. Now it doesn't simply return that, it has to do this check. So what we can do in the get accessor, we'll have this logic. If you remember, this is the ternary operator. We are checking, okay, if this dot name is null or empty, then return no name, else return whatever is there in that name field. Okay, so we can get rid of this get name now. So what we are doing is we are getting rid of the getter and setter methods which we introduced, and we are using properties instead. Okay, so now we have to make use of that value keyword because that's what receives the value which people set to this property. All right, so that's about name. And then this is interesting. Now look at this. This name property, it has got both set and get accessors, meaning this is a read write property. Somebody can assign a value to this property, which in turn will assign that value to the field, and somebody can read the value from this property. So it's a read write property. If it has got both get and set accessors, it's a read write property. But if you remember from our previous example, we wanted the pass mark field to be a read only field. Okay, so if you want a field to be read only, you want your property also to be read only. So what you do, you only have the get accessor, you will not have the set accessor. So in that case, it becomes a read only field. Okay, so how do I do that? Again, get pass mark. Instead of that, we will just say pass mark, and we don't have to have that parenthesis because this is a property, and all we will have is a get accessor. That's it, and we return that. So now what we have done in this example is we replaced all the getter and setter methods with properties with get and set accessors. And if you look at this example, we have two read write properties, name and ID, or read write properties because they have got get and set accessors, whereas pass mark is a read only property because it has got only the get accessor. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how to use that. So we don't have to have set name anymore. Instead, c1 dot name is equal to maybe mark, and pass mark I will not be able to set. Look at that. If I try to set pass mark to maybe 35 or 34, whatever, look at this, I get a compilation error immediately. And if you hover the mouse over that, you see property student that pass mark cannot be assigned to, it is read only. Because why? When we try to assign a value, pass mark property, right click on that, and when you say go to definition, look at this property. It has got only the get accessor. It doesn't have the set accessor. So you can't set a value to that. You can only read value from that field. So that's why this is a read only field. So very simple. To make a property read only, just have the get accessor, remove the set accessor. That makes it read only. And similarly, if you want to make a property write only, then you knock off the get accessor and have only the set accessor. That makes it write only. You can only, write a value or set a value, but you cannot read value from that property. So that's that. So now if I want to go ahead and print that, look at that, get name is like a method. We don't have to rely on getter and setter methods anymore. Instead, we use the properties. And look at this, properties, I use them as if they are fields. And similarly, if I want to use the pass mark, dot pass mark, and look at this, now I don't get a compiler error because the runtime is good enough to understand, okay, somebody is trying to read a value now because it doesn't have an equal to. Here it has an equal to, which means we are trying to set a value. So I think it makes that decision based on that, and it's trying to read the pass mark value here. And since the pass mark property has a get accessor, it will be able to do that. So when we go ahead and run that, the program works exactly the same, except that we're using C# properties instead of the getter and setter methods. Okay, so if we go back to the slides, in C# to encapsulate and protect fields, we use properties instead of the getter and setter methods. We use get and set accessors to implement properties. A property with both get and set accessor is a read-write property. A property with only get accessor is a read-only, and a property with only a write with a set accessor is a write-only property. And the advantage of using properties over traditional get and set methods is that you can access them as if they were public fields. And another important concept that got introduced in C# 3.0 is auto-implemented properties, because many a times, you know, you may not have any logic like this. For example, here we are validating the name field, and here we are validating, the student ID should not be negative. But many a times, let's say for example, maybe I have private string, maybe underscore city, where the customer is living, and maybe private string underscore email, etc. Now if I have to implement properties for this, then I have to type public string and maybe city, and then a get accessor, get return this dot underscore city. And similarly, we need to have the set accessor, which will set, maybe this dot underscore city is equal to value. Okay, and if I have to implement the email, then I have to do public, since that is also a string, public string email, and then we need to have a get and a set accessor. In the get accessor, we will say return this dot underscore email, and in the set accessor, we'll say this dot underscore email is equal to value. So I mean, for any properties that hasn't got any logic in the get or set accessor, this is a lot of code. And in reality, the objects are huge. They will have city, state, gender, etc. And most of them could be optional, and we don't have to have any kind of validation happening. So in those cases, this is a lot of code which we have to write. So that's why what they have done is in C# 3.0, they have actually implemented auto implemented properties. Okay, let's look at an example of how to do that. So for the city private field and for this email private field, if we have to convert them to properties, I need to have, these many lines of code. But what we can do with auto implemented properties is you don't have to have two private fields and then implement the properties. Simply what you can do, you can get rid of those two fields, and obviously when you get rid of them you get this warnings. And then what you can do is you can get rid of all this implementation, and you can simply say get and set. Similarly, get and set. So what's going to happen behind the scenes is that the compiler will create for us automatically a private field, and then this property will be used to read and write to that private field. Okay, so if you have 50 properties which doesn't have any logic within them, within the get and set accessors, you can make use of the auto implemented properties, which will reduce the amount of code that you have to write. And for auto implemented properties, the compiler will automatically create the backing private fields for us. Okay, so if you want to get the size even reduced, you can actually format that, something like that, get, and everything comes in one line. Anyway, so just like that, you can format this as well. So it's just one line. So if there is no additional logic in the property accessors, then we can make use of auto-implemented properties introduced in C# 3.0. Auto-implemented properties reduce the amount of code that we have to write. When you use auto-implemented properties, the compiler will create a private anonymous field that can only be accessed through properties get and set accessors. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.